Hello, everyone. Thank you for your interest on immersion for AI, immersion learning with artificial intelligence. I'm Leonel Morgado from Portugal, a full professor at Universidade Aberta, our national Portuguese language open university, and a senior researcher at the Independent Research Unit in ESCTech. The topic for this talk is what happens about immersion theory when we consider AIs as participants in learning scenarios rather than just tools that you use. To do so, let me give you a quick refresher on immersion from a theoretical standpoint. I'm following Nielsen et al.'s and Agarwal et al.'s perspectives, as is common in iLearn, where immersion is seen as a phenomenon that arises from three different concepts. System immersion is about when you are enveloped, surrounded by something. Then there's the narrative aspect, which is when your attentional focus is directed towards a narrative, towards context, towards meaning in general of in its interpretation. And then we have the agency aspect, which is when you are directed towards making meaning. And that could be by interacting or realizing what are your interaction options, but also whether this could be what could this be interpreted as at a more tactical or strategical level. This from a human perspective. However, if we consider AIs as participant on learning interactions, on learning environments, how can we use immersion theory to interpret their participation? And that is going to be the topic of this paper. So let's first consider system immersion. For a human, this is about three different things. It's about the physical space that surrounds us physically, and this includes gadgets like the visual reality headsets that we put on our heads, all of that physical stuff that surrounds us. But there is also virtual space. Most obviously, when you do put a visual headset, all the visual images and the sounds that you start to see and hear. But not just that. It could be, of course, augmented reality, but consider, even without any of that, all the notifications you get on your phones, all the multiplicity of information that it's not really physical, but it's constantly reaching out about you and from you. This is your virtual surrounding space. And finally, remember that you exist inside the brain and body. So all the biological balance, the biochemical and electrical balance of your body and your brain impacts who you are, what you do. That's also part of what surrounds you. So if we think about what this could be equivalent to from an immersion perspective, what surrounds AI, the key insight is that while for humans, one understands system immersion as physical, biological, AI is amidst data spaces. It's surrounded for data spaces such as its pre-trained model or its context window of the history of interactions live at the moment. It's also surrounded by a range of available services. Most famously, ChatGPT would ask DALL-E to create images until recently, or Code Analyzer to produce programmable, runnable code. ChatGPT could also ask a web search service for specific consultations and queries. Claude, a different AI, would use other services. These spaces that surround AI are not physical, but they have structural qualities because there are defined relationships between inputs, outputs, availability, communication protocols, and this guides how AI can process information. So the concept proposed here is that system immersion for AIs is not merely spatial. Well, it's also not spatial for humans, as I've seen about the virtual and the brain and the body. It's rather the range of AI's available data-driven structures and services along with their characteristics. What about narrative? Narrative immersion, according to the authors most cited for humans, is about spatial, temporal, and emotional aspects. So, obviously, the description of what is part of that narrative, where events take place, that's the spatial aspects of narrative. The temporal things, that what is the sequence of events? How far apart in time are they? And emotionally, not just your reactions, but rather what are the developing characteristics of characters, what are the ongoing concerns with future events in the narrative. What could this mean for an AI? Well, in terms of space, AI is aware of multiple spaces and locations like websites, databases, tables. These are just not a physical space. They do not have a continuum, but they do create a relationship of locations. So it's an atopic space, a space without a specific locale. It's space that is spread out. What about time? Well, an AI could get a timestamp with each interaction and infer time from that. But what if it doesn't? It still has a sequence of events reaching it. It still can infer that some interactions follow from others. So we could see time narrative for an AI being the sequence of events it's exposed to, regardless of the time between them. Emotional, however, could be trickier unless we think that an AI can infer from its patterns expected outcomes and therefore could assign different outcomes from those expected as anomalies. Hence, we can envision emotional narrative having this parallel on this kind of emotional twist for an AI of anomalies and unexpected patterns. This enables us to continue now to the last dimension, and that is the agency immersion dimension. This is about commitment to meaning making. Rather than doing, remember, humans' option not to do is also part of committing to meaning making. Sometimes not doing speaks louder. So you, as a human, have a range of abilities to act or don't act and make meaning from your actions and inactions. And this at the operational, tactical, and strategic levels. What about an AI? What can we think about it? Well, if you consider even current AIs, they must make decisions on their behavior towards you. For instance, should an answer be short or detailed? What's the level of refinement? That's an option to be made. Should it simply give an answer or ask you for clarification? That's another option that AI has in its roster of options. And finally, should it simply try to respond based on the information in its training? Or should it call an external tool as an extra support for answering? While you can tell an AI to do all these things, it can also and does make such calls regularly in our experience of interacting with them. This means that we can make an analogy to the theory of mind. An AI, when making a decision on whether to refine, ask for your collaboration or clarifications or on whether to call a tool or provide straight answers, must make some sort of an inference on expectations. I'm associating this inference on user expectations with a theory of mind. Whether this is valid or not, it's besides the point. It's an analogy which we can use to help us think about AI's agency immersion dimension. And so let's move on to practical implications from this thought experiment. The scenario I'm considering is one where teachers and students both engage with AIs, but also create and design their own AIs. This is true right now. This is not like science fiction. You can find multiple reports, even from primary school children, able to create their own AIs. You can do it today. If you have a professional account on ChatGPT, you simply go to the menus and say, create a custom GPT, give it instructions, and there you go. You can use it and you can share it, and it's a customized version. So, in this scenario, let's say it's about discussing climate change, for instance. Let's say teacher and students create their own AIs. For instance, one AI, which is represented in green at the middle, could be created by the student as a suggestion of ways to analyze data that would, when provided with the data the student is working with, could provide questions like what variables might we consider? How do you think what do you think it could be relevant to analyze? So this kind of collaborator instigator could be one kind of AI. A different one, possibly created by the teacher, could be an AI to regulate dynamics in group discussions in class. So for instance, suppose that the participants in a group were being stuck with very similar ideas. That AI, represented in blue here, could just say, let's reflect and try to find alternative ideas. Again, this could be done today and is already occurring throughout the world. Now let's consider what could immersion theory, following the concepts in this paper, contribute in terms of practical applications. Well, we should, at the very least, consider our prompting. If you go to system immersion on the left, we should consider what tools are available and how we could encourage AI to use those, how to navigate its data spaces, what are the protocols to interacting with them. Let's consider a sample prompt that embeds these ideas, like on the left. The prompt there it is. Consider the tools and plugins available to you. Use the most appropriate methods to analyze this dataset and extract key patterns related to climate change. Let's set that prompt aside for a second because we'll return to it. And now let's look to the bottom, to the narrative immersion inspired prompt. So if we consider narrative as narrative spaces, narrative time, and narrative emotion, and its relationship to AIs as relational mapping between different data spaces, as identifying sequences and expecting or identifying anomalies, we could try to leverage that by a prompt like this one. Analyze this climate change dataset and provide an overview of how data from different sources and their registration intersections relate to each other. Identify any unexpected patterns or deviations from expected trends. This prompt combines all these aspects of sequence, intersection, not in time, but in sequences, relational mapping, and anomalies. And finally, we can consider a prompt to take advantage of agency immersion. So, considering the scope of agency, considering whether or not to include cooperation, and trying to infer users' intent could lead us to a prompt to encourage this, like, you provided a broad summary of the climate policy's impacts on global emissions. Can you focus on a specific region and collaborate with me to explore how those policies influenced deforestation in South America during the last decade? Please ask for clarifications of my intent when not clear and balance depth and overview depending on the development of our conversation. Using these prompts is a way to try to encourage a more immersion dimensions presence, so to speak, in the interaction. Now, I tested this briefly, which is what I want to share with you, just a small test of feasibility. The test was run on February the 2nd of this year, and I did a one-shot prompt of each of the prompts for these four AIs. By one shot, it means there was no prior conversation, no prior context, no data set, nothing. I just placed the prompt and checked out what would be its impact on the responses. The full interactions are available publicly as a dataset at this address, so feel free to check the details. Let's look first at the system prompt, the one about considering the tools and plugins. By putting this prompt on these AIs, we have quite interesting outcomes. So Quen, for instance, provided a detailed code-based workflow showing awareness that it could perform data loading, it could clean the data, it had a knowledge of several of its abilities. DeepSeek at the moment failed to use such one of the services it requires, a search service, but actually that means it was aware it had a search service. Again, we had methodological outlines and several suggestions to using tools from Claude and from ChatGPT. So these results exhibit a form of system immersion. They can integrate the pre-trained knowledge with their affordances of service and dynamic access to digital resources. And this is seen in this result. What about narrative? Likewise, by putting the narrative prompt, we get interesting results. For instance, Quen outlined a multi-step approach, and that included, of course, the data sources, the alignment of variables, exploring of patterns, and expectations for agency immersion, explaining what could be the expected relationships and patterns. The same happened to DeepSeek, which instead focused on examples of unexpected patterns. Claude did realize the lack of an actual data set, but still proposed a methodological sequence of steps, and again examples and discussions from ChatGPT. So these outcomes support the argument that we can use prompts inspired on narrative immersion, and that it could involve interpreting the content of the data and identifying sort of a narrative from the interplay of variables and trends to get not just sequences, but also expectations. Finally, we reach agency immersion. By testing the illustrative prompt, Quen actually did ask for clarifying questions. And similarly, the other AIs requested for additional details or even for identification of alternative pathways for refining the analysis. And this is quite emblematic of agency immersion. It shows that when prompted to enable this dimension, AIs can engage in shaping the dialogue. They can ask for clarifications, they can try to select multiple analytical pathways. And so we can try to leverage this for a commitment to meaning making and decision making. These promising results lead us to ask, okay, so what now? I think the key takeaways is that we can start considering AI as an immersive participant, not as a mere tool. And that requires reinterpreting system narrative and agency for AI participants if we want to use immersive learning as a theory to interpret these kind of scenarios. This, of course, has design implications, most obviously prompts, but environments themselves that we should try to align to the three concepts of immersion. There's plenty that we could do in the future. First, we can consider that we might have adaptive meaning-making AIs. So we could try to use these ideas to collaborate with researchers in the field to create new AIs that evolve in real time from an immersion perspective. But also, we could try to simulate these cognitive ecologies, these environments that combine AIs and humans as training grounds to develop that training. We could also co-design immersive learning environments with AIs, with teachers and learners, and see how that would recommend changes to design of learning. And all of this is going to create very, very, very confusing and examples that it will be hard to compare, which is why I'm calling that, just as I did for this very simple paper and presentation, that you share your data sets, that you share your interactions as open data sets for attempts at comparing and replicating your approaches. This is basically what I would like to achieve, and I thank everyone for the time involved. Please reach me out with this email. I'm happy to answer any questions that you bring about. Thank you so much.